Good morning everybody, and welcome to another out and about video. And today we find ourselves here in a place called Egerton, and it's not far from the centre of Bolton, and I think Egerton is in that direction. But we're here to cover the tale of a story that occurred back in 1890, and to the horrific tragedy that occurred here along Longworth Lane, involving a young lady, a 21-year-old lady called Elizabeth Holt. Elizabeth Holt, she was a school teacher. She was a headmistress at nearby Belmont National School, and each morning on a Monday morning she would leave her house over on Darwen Road, which is in that direction, probably about a 15-20 minute walk away from where we are now, and she'd make her way along Longworth Lane, which is this lane here, and it circles all the way around to what's called Longworth Road in that direction. Now, she'd do this walk religiously every Monday, and what she would do, she would make her way towards the school, like I said, where she was the headmistress, and she'd stay there until the Friday afternoon, and then she'd make the same walk back home along this path back to her house in Darwen Road. Now, on the 10th of November 1890 she made the same walk, and like I said, it was a ritual walk. It was the same thing every week, every Monday. Unfortunately, something occurred on this stretch of land. And we know for a fact that where we've just walked from, and we'll go to the scene shortly, she encountered something so terrifying and truly horrific that the residents of not only Egerton but Egerton and surrounding towns and villages, it literally shocked them to the very core. When Elizabeth didn't return home on the Friday afternoon or the Friday evening, obviously the parents weren't overly concerned at this point. And when I say parents, I mean Elizabeth's mother, who was also called Elizabeth. But it wasn't until the following Saturday morning, obviously there was still no sign of her, and which it seemed out of character for Elizabeth not to return home. Because like I said, she spent 5 days staying over at the national school where she was the headmistress. So her sister sent out a young friend of the family, and he went on his bicycle up to the school to find out where Elizabeth was. When he got there, he was quickly informed that obviously she hadn't even appeared at the school all week, and the school, the authorities there, the teachers there, just presumed that she must have been ill and she stayed at home, and she was too ill that she couldn't inform the school that she wouldn't be attending that week. So they didn't think much of it. Now, obviously panicking, the young boy returned back to Elizabeth's home and told her mother that she'd not been seen at school all week. Elizabeth's mother, obviously, at the beginning of the week, had just presumed that she'd made her way to school, because, like I said, it wasn't nothing new. It wasn't out of character. Elizabeth always made that weekly walk to and from work. So you could say communication at the time, nobody seemed to suspect anything. There was nothing untoward occurred. Though obviously when the young boy returned home and informed the parents that Elizabeth hadn't arrived at the school, they were frantic. The mother was frantic, and so was the sister. So they sent out for help. The police were informed, and a search was quickly instigated around these areas along Longworth Lane and along, obviously, towards Longworth Road. It came out on the Saturday afternoon that a young boy by the name of Clement Talbot remembered, or he recalled seeing and finding an umbrella on Longworth Lane. His dog had stopped and it was barking at this item on the floor, and it turned out to be an umbrella. So Clement's got off his bike and he's gone over and he's looked at the umbrella, but he thought he could hear something or somebody murmuring, or he thought he could hear something, and he just presumed somebody was in the woods nearby. Now, we don't know if he did hear something or it's just in his imagination. It could have been nothing. It could have been the sound of the stream flowing by, as you can hear now in the background. But he didn't really think much of it. He just thought somebody dropped it, and obviously there might have been either a young couple or a young lady or whatever in the woods nearby. So he just left the umbrella where it was, and he didn't inform anybody. Now, later on that afternoon, obviously when everybody in the nearby neighbourhood realised Elizabeth was missing and people were out looking for her, Clement's older brother John, he talked to Clement about what he'd seen on the Thursday. Clement actually opened up and said, look, I did find something, but I didn't give it much thought. So John has made his way down to Longworth Lane, just off Longworth Road, and about 300 yards or so from Longworth Hall, and this plays an important role. And this is how we've got a rough idea where Elizabeth's body would eventually be found. But John made his way down to Longworth Lane and to the area where the brolly was. The brolly was still there. Now, upon investigation, John, he went into like the edge of the lane and he made his way down things like this, down the embankments, a steep incline, and he found various articles that obviously belonged to somebody, such as tea and coffee wrapped in a packet, butter wrapped in a piece of paper. He found buttons off a woman's cardigan or blouse. I think he found a pair of slippers. So obviously he's anxious at this point, we would presume. But the further down the embankment he's got and the incline, then he's come across the body of poor Elizabeth. Whilst we know Elizabeth's body wasn't found anywhere here and it was further in that direction, we can't actually get to the spot itself simply because it's all now fenced off for safety reasons, obviously, and you'll see why when we get there. But it was along this river here, which goes all the way further round, and it was along here obviously where her body would ultimately be found by John Talbot, the brother of Clement. Now, what he found that morning, it was truly horrific. I mean, from first instances, he could see that she was semi-naked. The top half of her clothing had been removed, so she was exposing her breasts. She was lying on her side. I think her head was inclined to the right. Now, he'd seen that she'd suffered from some form of violent abuse or attack, but it wasn't until they got her to the top of the embankment when the full details of the attack would fully emerge. So when they brought Elizabeth to the top of the embankment along Longworth Lane, this is when the full extent of the injuries were seen for the first time. The police obviously were on the scene, and they laid the body out on a piece of cloth, if you will. Now, initial viewings, obviously it wouldn't have made for pretty looking at or pretty reading. She had a deep wound to her neck under her chin, which was cut pretty much straight down to the spine. It looked like she'd been kicked several times, as her head on one side was pretty much smashed in. She'd suffered bruising to her lips, her mouth, her arms looked like she'd been grabbed hold of quite tightly. but she also had a stab wound to the back of her head. So it was a pretty violent and graphic attack on poor Elizabeth. And at this point, nobody quite knew why or who would have done such a thing. But it would only take another hour or two in the evening when all suspicions fell on a character who was well known in these parts, and that man was named Thomas MacDonald. So Thomas MacDonald, who was he? Well, he was, I wouldn't say a known criminal, but he was known in these parts for being a bit of a ne'er-do-well, or a wrong-un in what we'd say in today's language. He had been arrested back in 1882 for the rape of I think it was a 9-year-old girl over at Turton. Now, he got 10 years cerebral penitentiary for that, hard labour, but he was released 8 years later, obviously in 1890, in April. Now, it wasn't too long after that, in September the same year, 1890, when he would be further arrested for the murder and the death of another chap called Thomas Mather, who was found drowned in a lodge, again in Turton. However, there wasn't enough evidence, there wasn't any witnesses other than people saying that he'd been seen drinking with Thomas during the night, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute him for murder. So he was actually released without charge on that one. But everything else now seemed to point to Thomas MacDonald being the chap, or being the person who perhaps committed the murder on Elizabeth Holt. From all accounts, the days and weeks leading up to Elizabeth's tragic murder, she'd actually been seen coming home frightened, like she'd encountered something truly frightening. And she'd often tell her mother that this chap called Thomas MacDonald had been harassing her along Longworth Lane as she was making her way to and from work. She was telling people that she was afraid of him, that he was acting in a creepy, strange behaviour towards her. He was always watching her along this lane. The thing is, nobody really took it seriously. They just thought, well, he's a wrong and he's a bad one, but just keep out of his way, you'll be fine. But he obviously got wind of this. He found out that she'd been spreading gossip, rumours about him being a strange character, and he didn't like it. Now, when he was arrested, at first, obviously, he denied all knowledge of Elizabeth's murder or have anything to do with it. But it would all come out in the subsequent inquest and the inquiries that he did confirm to a police officer that he was going to cause some serious harm to Elizabeth. He was all out to get her. He'd changed that, and he'd say he wasn't going to get her, he was going to shake her up, he was going to scare her for what she'd been saying about him to family and friends and whatnot, because he was taking it quite personally that somebody could obviously belittle him and, you know, call him strange and creepy, and he didn't take kindly to it. So he was going to sort her out along Longworth Lane at some point. Was he the killer? Did he murder her on November the 10th? We'll get to that shortly. Now, it appears that on the Saturday, obviously word had got out that the body of Elizabeth had been discovered here along Longworth Lane, and Thomas MacDonald, he made his way to his aunt's work, and he protested that he needed to speak to his aunt. Now, his aunt was called Honor Ban. So she came to the factory door where she was working, and he was outside in a frenzied state of mind. Now, he told us some tales about somebody coming from America. Now, we presume he was just saying that somebody was coming from America to take him away, because he obviously was the killer of Elizabeth and he needed to get out of the area quickly. And then he turned around to his aunt and said something on the like, you know, obviously, I'm after a murder, I'm after committing a murder. In other words, they're after me for committing a murder. So Honor turned around to him and said, well, why don't you just go away and drown yourself and stop putting more shame on me, which is an odd thing to actually come out with. Now, he turned around and said to her, well, I'm going to go to the police station over in Bolton and I'm going to confess and hand myself in. So then she went back into work and thought no more about it. Now, when she got home from work that evening on the Saturday, Thomas was in the house, or he came into the house, and he said to her, where's my pocket knife and where's my tobacco box? Now, at the time, she remembers seeing a knife in the kitchen on a table, but she can't recall it having blood on it, any smears on the handle or anything like that. But he certainly came home that evening to collect a knife and a tobacco box. Now she also asked him, did you hand yourself in to the police? What did the police say? And he turned in and said, oh, it's alright, they've let me out on bail until the following Tuesday or the following Thursday. Now again, it was all lies from Thomas. He was literally covering his tracks at this point, and he'd do anything desperate to obviously leave this area, and especially Blackburn Road, from where he lived. Now we've just come across this neat little feature in the woods, some kind of generator here, but it looks like some form of, I don't know, is it a windmill? Old windmill? Just at the very top. But it's all rusted and decayed. But here, just in the middle of the woods. So again, as we cover these dark stories, we do come across structures and things of interest, which we'll always add in the video, because like I said, it is something unique and different. So was Thomas MacDonald the killer? Well, it seems that when he was arrested and they took his knife off him, and obviously they also took some articles of clothing off him to obviously see if there was any blood, which could obviously, I want to be matched up with Elizabeth, because obviously there was no DNA back in the time, but they just wanted to see what articles of clothing he was wearing roughly at the time, and if there were any evidence of blood, blood and any evidence of violence, if you will, like his clothes might have been ripped. But he did tell one police officer that, obviously what went on that day, that morning, he didn't mean to kill her. Things escalated. He basically grabbed hold of, from all accounts, he grabbed hold of Elizabeth by the shoulder, the right shoulder, along Longworth Lane, and he did it so tightly, and he said, look, I need to talk to you, I want you to retract what you've been saying about me in the local community, bad mouthing me, I'm not weird, I'm not here to do any harm. And she spun round, and with the handle of her umbrella, she's clocked him on the forehead, but enough to actually daze him for a few seconds. And I remember telling the police officer, and also while he was standing trial for her murder, that while he was dazed, Elizabeth had plenty of time to get up and run away, but she didn't. She seemed to freeze in terror. Obviously that could have been shock, what she's just done to him. She might have thought, well, he didn't mean me any harm and I've just overreacted. We don't know. But the fact is, he's then got hold of her when he's obviously his thought process has come back. He's got hold of her, but he's flown into an almighty rage, and he's kicked her to the ground. And then I think he's kind of started to strangle her. He started kicking her in the head when he stood back up, and then something snapped in his head where he thought, obviously this, I shouldn't be doing this. What's going on? He's completely lost it. But she's got up and she started screaming. He's then kicked her back down to the ground, and this time he's kicked her with enough force. The police seem to think, and Dr. Robinson, the forensic examiner, seems to think that the kicks alone to her throat would have been enough to kill Elizabeth there and then. But what Thomas has done, he's dragged her by the feet down the incline, down in towards the brook, if you will, where he's then commenced to slit her throat. He stabbed her several times, and then he's made it look like somebody's tried to rape her. So I think I might have found a way down to where young Elizabeth was brutally murdered. There is a pathway which takes us to the bottom of the delta, if you will. I'm not saying this is going to be the exact location 100%, but it's going to be as close as we can possibly get to it. But it seems that when Thomas had pretty much killed her on Longworth Lane by stamping and kicking her in the neck, he's dragged her feet first down an embankment such as this. And I'll turn the camera around. But as you can see, he's brought her down an incline such as this. And from all newspaper accounts and what we've read, and we know roughly how far away from Longworth Hall they were when the attack took place, and it was about 150 to 300 yards away from the hall. It's commenced to drag her all the way down an incline such as this. Now, when we talk about she wasn't raped, it was proved at the trial that she was never raped, she was never interfered with, just her clothing. Dr. Robinson said there was obviously no indication of rape taking place, but Thomas admitted that he tried to make it look like a rape to take the police off his scent, if you will. Now, the thing with that is, because obviously Thomas had a record of rape against a young girl back in 1882, you'd have thought that he would have been one of the first people they would have suspected of being the murderer, because of that record and because of the way he'd left Elizabeth's body. But in court, Thomas would actually admit that he never went out to rape Elizabeth. But yeah, basically what we're looking at here is, I think, the location of where Elizabeth's body would ultimately be found on this Saturday of November, and it was on that side of the brook, just in that direction, just somewhere across here, because like I say, Longworth Hall isn't too far away in that direction, and we know it's about 150 to 300 yards away, so we're looking at somewhere along this neck here. This is where he dragged Elizabeth's body and tried basically to hide her. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm on my own down at the bottom of the actual incline where we think Thomas dragged Elizabeth, and I have to say it's so quiet, and all I can hear is the fallen branches from the trees. I can hear the river flowing just in the background, but it is so silent. You know, I mean, even if Elizabeth screamed, because it would have been a foggy, thick blanket of fog that morning, I don't think anybody in this area could have possibly heard her screams for help or the fight or the tussle taking place. It feels really dark, and it does feel heavy in this location. I might be just overreacting because I know obviously the story, but it does have a ominous vibe to it. So we're going to make our way back onto the main lane itself, where we'll continue with the story. So we think, like I said guys, that this is the kind of path, or the area where Thomas would have dragged her body, and it's a fair distance to drag it, because if the lane is just where my daughter stood, I don't know if you can see her through the trees, she's been dragged all the way down an old pathway such as this to the bottom, and we know from all accounts it was a steep incline at the end, which we've just seen. So we do feel like we have got the right location. I didn't think we would actually get to it, but you can see just how vast and how open space it is at this point, and then to get into the forest itself. By the way, in these woods, it was known as two things: the clough and the woods. And a lot of witnesses used to change what they were saying in court. You know, like they saw Thomas and Elizabeth near to the woods, they saw Thomas and Elizabeth near to the clough, and this is basically the woods or the clough, depending on which word you want to use. Now, many inquiries and inquests took place on the 18th of November, 20th of November and the 24th of November, And each time Thomas would try to obviously get out of it. He'd try to lie to the police, even though he did confess to a police officer, like I said, on the evening of his arrest. He still tried to change his story. And in one of the inquests, he actually stopped it after examining Dr. Robinson himself, or interviewing Dr. Robinson. And we have to remember that Thomas defended himself in all the inquests. He never had anybody to try to defend him himself, so he did it all on his own. But he asked that Dr. Robinson could coming back into the court, and he'd question him for, I think it was for about an hour. And then something happened, we don't know what, but something happened and was said which gave thoughts and gave way to Thomas's plea, if you will. And he basically then wrote a written confession detailing exactly everything that went on from 8 o'clock in the morning until he actually came across Elizabeth on Longworth Lane. On the 10th of November at 8 o'clock in the morning, I started from home to go to Belmont to see my manager. On my way at the spot that has been mentioned, I overtook her. I got hold of her by the shoulder. I asked her what she had been telling lies about me for. I told her that I followed her for a few weeks ago for the purpose of doing some harm. She told me to let go of her shoulder. I told her I would not do so until she retracted what she had said. She jerked her shoulder out of my hand, shut her umbrella, took hold of the small end of it and struck me with the handle across the brow. I became enraged, threw her down and caused those wounds in her head through being in violent passion. I then cut her throat, dragged her across the footpath and down the ravine in which she was found. I made the marks in her neck after making the wounds in her throat to destroy all evidence against me. When I took her into the hollow, I tore and cut open her clothes to see if her heart beat. I found it did not beat. I then covered her with fern fronds and oak leaves. Now, as for Thomas, despite his confession and despite trying to change his confessions numerous times, he would be found guilty of the murder of Elizabeth Ann Holt. And on Tuesday the 30th of December 1890, he would face his executioner James Barry at Kirkdale Prison. Now, by all accounts, the week leading up to his execution, he spent in bed. He was ill, and again, from all accounts, it may have been out of fear, it may have been out of remorse. We just don't know, but he was ill for that last week of his life, and he did spend it in bed. Now, the morning itself was a cold, wet, miserable day, and it's quite apt really, because it was also similar conditions when he took Elizabeth's life here back on November the 10th. So the weather, like I said, it was cold, it was wet, it was miserable. Several news reporters had congregated to watch the proceedings. Now, he didn't say anything leading up to the actual death chamber, if you will, other than, is it called the Litany of Christ? And I'll put the words down below of exactly what he was saying. But yeah, by all accounts, he went to the scaffold and he didn't really say anything other than, like I said, what I've put down at the bottom of the screen. However, MacDonald would still have the last word, as his aunt, Honor Ban, shortly received a letter written by MacDonald the day before his execution. Dear Aunt, when you go to the chapel tomorrow, think of who it was that came into this world to redeem up poor sinners. He came not as a prince or emperor, but as a weak and lowly babe, to show us how humble we should be, also to be on our guard against getting into a violent passion. You see what my passions have brought me to, nothing less than a disgraceful death. But it is no good murmuring. Let us hope God, who is all merciful, will show his mercy to me at my hour of death. I hope you will pray earnestly for me for these next few days, not only with your lips, but with your hearts, and God will surely bless you all. So no more from your unworthy nephew, Thomas MacDonald. But it is a truly horrific and again needless crime. A young woman of 21 years old who went about her daily business. She enjoyed working at the National School over in Belmont, where she spent 5 days before she made the return home. She trusted these pathways. She'd made them regularly. She had nothing to be afraid of other than Thomas MacDonald. But it seems that all her worries went unheeded. She told people about him. She used to tell people how frightened she was of him, meeting him on these deserted and unfrequented roads back in the day. It went unheeded. You've also got to look at his actual record itself. He was accused and he was sentenced for raping a 9-year-old back in 1882, and yet he was still allowed to roam free eight years later. Absolute madness. We've also got obviously the strange death or murder, if you will, of Thomas Mather in September of the same year, and how Thomas himself was implicated in that simply because he'd been drinking with Thomas throughout the evening before his death. So you've got the young girl, you've got Thomas, and then obviously you've got Elizabeth. You've got three strange and horrific events in 1890 alone, all around Thomas MacDonald. Going back to the Thomas Mather one, something came out in court when they were going through the inquest, and I can only presume it came from his aunt, Hannah Ban. But it came out that after he'd been released from jail for the death or the murder of Thomas Mather, he went home and he trashed the house he was in, which again presume was Hannah Ban's. But they also must have had a canary that they had in a cage. And if it's true, we don't know, but it's just what was written in the press at the time, and I'll put it up below. But it says that he got in and he'd seen the canary in the cage looking at him after he's trashed the house, and he set fire to it. So that, again, if it's true, it gives you some kind of clue as to this guy's mindset, doesn't it? You know, it was obviously, he didn't have any empathy towards life and towards animals, towards people. He just didn't care, did he? But this guy was allowed to leave prison after 8 years of serving a 10-year jail term, if you will, for raping a 9-year-old. Now I know things were different back in the time. We didn't have records of paedophiles and things like that. I don't think the word paedophile was actually used back in the 1890s. So there was no databases, there was nothing like that. It was just, it might have been on his record, but was his record easily accessible when he was arrested for the death of Elizabeth Holt? I don't really know, to be honest, but like I said, looking back at his life, he was a criminal, and you would say a criminal of the highest level, if you will. But the death of Thomas Mather in September 1890, now that is a strange one, and I think that is a story that I think we could come back to, and hopefully we could dig up some more information on that. And you never know, it all might point to Thomas being involved in that poor chap's death. Elizabeth was buried at Christ Church in Walmsley on the 18th of November, and it appears that around 15,000 people all lined the streets and tried to get into the actual burial place itself, in the actual graveyard, to pay their respects, because it was such a brutal, it was horrific. It also gained a lot of news, if you will, around the area. You know, the newspaper articles were full of it, the descriptions of the actual murder itself. I won't say it was interesting to the people, it was shocking and it was frightening. So that obviously garnered a lot more interest in the case. And like I said, it was reported about 15,000 people all commenced down to Christ Church in Walmsley. And we're going to go there shortly, and we're going to try and find the grave, the final resting place of Elizabeth. We have seen photos online, so we do know she's there. So we're going to head on over there, I should say, to hopefully find it for ourselves and pay our respects. So as we make our way back to the car along Longworth Lane, even today, as I said when I was further down in the Delph, you can get a sense of just how quiet it is now. So what would it have been like over 100 years ago, and especially in the early hours of morning, 8 o'clock, when it was really foggy, thick blankets of fog? It would have been even quieter. So it does beg the question, and you can't really condemn Elizabeth for any of this, but you do have to wonder what made her walk this way on such a wet, foggy morning, when she was afraid of Thomas MacDonald and what he perhaps could do to her. Like I said, I'm not putting any blame on Elizabeth whatsoever, but you've got to think to yourself, why would you come this way when she could have gone along Longworth Road from Darwen Road and Blackburn Road, which links onto Longworth Road in the distance. It might have took her a little bit longer, but still, I mean, I suppose nobody can ever foresee an attack taking place, so she would have made this walk, not really giving it much thought, I guess. Now, like I said, I'm not trying to put any of this at all on Elizabeth, because like I said, nobody can foresee it, like I've just said, what could have happened during the morning of November 10th, 1890. But I mean, it's a really weird feeling knowing that, like me now, I'm walking ahead, minding my own business, but yeah, 150 yards further behind me would have been my attacker, and he would have been watching every move that I was doing, just waiting for his chance to do what he did. It's a frightening prospect, especially when you're walking along these old country lanes, and more so back in the day. Like I said, you know, it would have been foggy, it would have been wet, it would have been so silent. And like I said, there were a couple of witnesses that saw both Thomas and Elizabeth leading up to the events. But yeah, it's such a needless, and it's a needless crime. It just didn't need to happen, did it? And if it's true what Thomas said to the police, and whilst he was being quizzed in prisons and obviously at his trials, that he never went out to attack her or to harm her in any way, and things just escalated, still, by all accounts, he was a violent man, and it seems like he'd been pretty much on the edge for pretty much most of his life, because I think he was about 24 when he was arrested for raping the young girl in Turton. So he'd have been 32, 33 when he attacked Elizabeth. Before I go back to the court, I'm going to try one last attempt to actually get to the bottom of the ravine where the stream is, where the attack took place. Not guaranteed, but it's coming up now on my right, and if I can get you guys there, all the better, because it will obviously add more to the story, and it'll show just exactly just how deep this side and the incline was when the murder took place. So just from this view alone, as I said earlier, there is fences everywhere, and we think the attack is just below us down here where it took place. Now, I need to go along the main road, Longworth Road, and get down that side, but the murder took place on this side. But if I can get on that side and show you guys just how steep the embankments were, it'll give a sense as to just how difficult it would have been to drag Elizabeth's body down, and understandably why it took so long for a body to be found. I mean, just from this outcut in here now, you can't really see it on GoPro, but that side is really steep, and it's the same on this side. But we know that, like I said, her body was somewhere down here on this side of the path, Longworth Lane, and this is Longworth Lane, and where Vicky, my daughter, is, that is Longworth Road. Longworth Hall is just through the tree line, just across the road there, and that is where other witnesses saw Thomas leaning on a gatepost shortly after the events that took place here. Yeah, so we're not going to be able to get down to it, it's way too steep. The murder took place just through the tree lines, this tree and this tree, right through the centre there on the dip, right at the bottom on the right hand side. But you can see just how steep that wall of, well, shrubbery, trees, the hillside, it's just so steep. And you can also see going down here, it's literally, it's not even 45 degrees. I mean, I can see the water at the bottom. But yeah, the murder itself took place just through that tree line, just on the riverbed, just where I'm pointing now. And like I said, guys, Longworth Hall is literally just where this red building is to the right, from all accounts, if I look at the old OS maps. So they would have walked all the way up, all the way around, and then you've got Longworth Lane, which goes across where we just walked. But yeah, poor Elizabeth was found just through that tree line, just in that distance there. We're now currently looking for the final resting place of Elizabeth, and we know she's interred here at Christchurch in Egerton. We have seen photos online of where her coffin was interred and her body was interred, where it is we're not sure. We know it's in here, so we're going to do some walking around and hopefully we can find her. What I will say, I've never been to this graveyard before, but as you can see, it's pretty darn big. But we're not going to give in with this one, because we do know, like I said, there is a photo online, and I think it's Find a Grave, which we found a photo somebody had kindly put up. So we do know she's interred here, and we do know what kind of resting place we're looking for, if you know what I mean, what plot we're looking for, because it has green looking rails around it. It's definitely not down in this area anyway, that's for sure. So we'll keep on looking, and as I keep saying, hopefully we will find where our final resting place is. Look at this one. How cool is this one? John Henry Holden, 1st Baronet, died 1926, and Emma his wife. But I've never seen anything on this scale locally where you've actually got, I presume, is it a crypt or a mausoleum? Wow. So we finally found the final resting place of poor Elizabeth Ann Holt. Now we've had to remove some of the moss, but you'll just about make a name out there, Elizabeth Ann Holt. So this is where she was interred on the 18th of November 1890, and like I said, from all accounts there were up to, I think, 15,000 people that had made their way to pay the final respects. But I'm glad we found where she is, because it closes the story for us in the most respectfulest of ways. So for those who want to pay the respects to Elizabeth, if you make your way into Christchurch off the main road and veer to your right and park your car in the car park just behind this small, I think it's a small chapel. If you walk up and follow this road up and not through the actual graves where we originally did, if you make your way up, you'll come to Christchurch itself, which is obviously here. Now from opposite, just come straight across and you'll find Elizabeth's grave, and it's easy identifiable simply because of the wrought iron around it, and the tree just behind. And that's how easy it is to come and pay your respects. So there you go folks, the sad tragedy of Elizabeth Ann Holt. Now if you did like this story and you want more real life Victorian crimes to be told, please comment down below and let me know your thoughts, and let me know your thoughts on this story in particular. But at the moment it's got very noisy, some kind of plane overhead or an helicopter, so we'll leave it here for today. Hope you did enjoy the story. Like I said, if you did, comment down below. Don't forget to give us a like, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because there's videos coming all the time. But in the meantime, as I always say at the end of all these videos, I want you to take care. Most importantly, look after each other, and we will be back soon with another tale from our dark but illustrious past. Take care.